Hello and welcome back to the Games Den podcast, episode 3. Today we are joined by a special guest. But first, let me introduce the regular cast. Hi, I'm Atty, and I'm a UX designer and game developer.
Hi, I'm Shashank. I am a you're pointing the wrong way on my screen, which is great. I am a I guess full stack developer. I mostly just play games.
Hi, I'm Evan. I'm a developer, I guess, focusing on design.
That sentence is like, I am a developer, I guess, focusing on design. Does that make me a UX designer? An interaction developer? Diviner?
I don't know. I'll tell you that. I have no idea. I'm just vibing, dude.
We all are.
And let me throw the hat to our special guest.
Welcome to the show.
Everything's a mistake and I regret it. No. Hello, everyone. I'm Nathaniel, and what am I?
What are you?
What are you?
It's always the question.
I am a chemical engineering graduate, I guess. I just like games.
And also a
like
previous
games.
executive of the Games Den.
Yeah.
That doesn't
Probably.
count.
Of course it does.
Okay.
Yeah, today you got a very packed session for you. A lot of stuff to talk about. But first, let's talk about what Games Den does. If you're not aware, the Games Den is the game development club at the University of Alberta. We make, talk, and play games. We often host workshops from with various indie developers and AAA studios here in Edmonton. And we also just hang out, play games, have fun. Last week we chose not to do an episode because we decided there were more important voices that needed to be amplified, and so we decided not to have an episode last session. Instead, we shared a bunch of links that you can always go visit on our website, and you can find links to support various different fundraisers and Black game developers and other podcasts that you can listen to.
Yeah.
And yeah, Sean, you want to talk about anything else in the intro section?
Just check out the page at thegamesden.ca.
Awesome. So we want to start off the session, like start off all our sessions, talk about what we've been playing. Who wants to go first?
I guess I can go first because it's kind of like a continuation of last episode. Last episode I talked about how I was trying to get my parents to play Breath of the Wild. So they gave up.
Oh no.
But watching them play Breath of the Wild, I was like, wait a second. This is a really fun game. And so I started up my second save file on it. And I have made the probably poor decision to do 100% of the Korok seeds as well.
No.
So
I don't know what that means.
there are 300 some Korok seeds, basically just like things in the environment. Collectibles, yeah, that are just like out of place, and you go around and you do like put a rock in a certain place and you get a Korok seed. And there's 300 some of them.
I thought engineering students were masochists, but okay, yeah. Go ahead and take that bar and raise it.
To follow up with that, there's a very good video on YouTube talking. Let me see if I can find it for you guys. But there's a very good video on YouTube talking about why the reward for collecting 200 Korok seeds is what it is. Which, Shashank, you know what the reward is, right?
Yeah. It's
It's
worthless.
It's not a spoiler because the game's like 2-3 years old now.
Yeah.
But after you collect 300 Korok seeds, you get a golden piece of poop from an NPC.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. And there's a very good video kind of detailing hypothesizing why the designers would have that be the reward of the game. But I won't
People
get
like
too much into
me.
that.
If you think you're hot shit, okay.
Yeah,
What else have we been playing?
Evan.
Recently I started playing Skullgirls over the past couple of weeks, and I am very bad at that game,
Mm-hmm.
and I doubt I will ever be properly good at the game, but it's still very interesting to me. The tutorials in that game are actually ridiculously good, and it has a lot of just user experience stuff that makes it a much more welcoming experience for new players. Like when you're in a local match with someone you know, at any point you can go into the settings and turn it to sparring mode, which just turns it into training mode in the middle of your match. And as soon as you turn it off, it just goes right back to the pacing of the match, which is really cool. If you feel like you need to show whoever you're playing with something you can do, or try to figure out how to block a certain combo, that's kind of neat, and something I don't really see often.
Right.
Yeah, I 3-0'd Evan. It was pretty great. Oh, really good.
Yep. Yeah, you did that a couple of times.
I'm kidding.
Trying to avoid that part, bud.
I've been playing a lot of fighting games, so I've learned the fundies now. So I just played fundies.
Yeah.
I didn't know what my buttons did. I was just mashing. All I knew was when to take my turn. You also played Journey, am I right? You talked about that a little bit.
Yes. With Journey coming to Steam, over the past week, I picked it up and played it for the first time. That game is amazing. It is now one of my all-time favorites. I want to play it more. It's hard to describe like how good it really is.
Right.
Other than it just does like everything very well. Like from just how it does show don't tell. I love movement in games. I think that game does movement perfectly. It's just very good across the board, and it's been a wonderful experience for 2 hours.
Yeah. I need to check it out.
Do it.
It's been one of my all-time favorite games for a very long time, and I've given a lot of talks and slideshows about flow and Journey and how it kind of adapts that. Genova Chen, the founder of that video game company, the people who made Journey, wrote a master's thesis about flow in games, and his games, like he made Flow, and then he made Flower, and then he made Journey, and all of them kind of building off of each other in terms of how to create an optimal experience. And you can really see the results of that iteration kind of show up in Journey towards the very end.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a very gripping experience, and I can revisit it how many times I want to, and I'll never get sick of it. It's just amazing. Highly recommend it. I have been playing Hanabi, which is a board game, but it's also online. I think it's hanabi.cards, I think is the site name.
Yeah, I think so.
But Hanabi is a board game made by a French designer. I forget his name now. But it's one of the most elegantly designed card games I've ever played. Cooperative card games I've ever played. It's almost, I'd say it's actually better designed than Coup is, which is already an elegantly designed game.
Yeah.
And so what Hanabi does so well is like it's based off of information, right? Everything in the game is based off of information. It's about what you don't know what is the cards that are in your hand, but you know what every other player has in their hand. And your goal is to build 5 stacks of fireworks to get a max score of 25. But you can get any score in between 0 and 25. And the score you get kind of decides how good your fireworks display is, which is this really sweet little end goal to kind of meet. But I've been playing it with the same group of friends over and over again every single night. And I've just watched us kind of develop a meta game strategy to approaching everything. Right. Like we just understand that we will always discard the rightmost card in our hand to get a hint back. Like all 3 of us have that common understanding now. And so we've become like a Hanabi pro team. We've developed this meta around the way we play. And so we always get scores about 20 at this point. We never get scored below 20. And it's really impressive.
Nice.
highly recommend checking out the
Good
game.
job.
It's a great game to play with friends and family.
Yeah.
I have also been revisiting Spider-Man for the PS4.
Ooh.
For some reason, whenever I'm feeling like I'm in a meh mood, kind of just want to chill out, I boot up Spider-Man PS4 and swing around the city, and it's actually really meditative for some reason. Like just swinging around the city, I don't understand why, but just the feeling of like timing the release of your webs at the right time to gain more momentum, swinging all the way up and then doing backflips in the air. It's just such a cool meditative experience. And so I'm really excited for Spider-Man Miles Morales now because
Yeah.
it's going to be pretty hype. So yeah, that's what I've been playing recently.
Nice.
Nice.
How about you, Nathaniel?
I've been playing a few games recently, which is impressive considering I haven't played many games recently. But I picked up Killing Floor 2 a little while ago. Played that with a couple friends of mine. Decent zombie killing game, decent wave game. I know it's nice. It's nice.
Yeah.
DLC is a bit pricey. I'm never gonna touch that with the 10-foot pole, but like nice. Been playing Sims 4. Just again, DLC is a bit pricey, so that's not the picture. But it's just it's a game I've been wanting to play. The Sims has been a game I've wanted to play for a while and haven't touched since I was a child. So touching it again is kind of like it's kind of fun. I usually just let it. I usually just make sure it's always on like what's the word? The one word like ×1 speed.
Okay.
And usually like whenever my Sims at work, I just like start reading a book or start doing something else, kind of like just enjoy living life with my Sim. You know, let him do his thing, let him do my thing.
That's interesting.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nathaniel is
something
actually living two lives now.
multitasking.
Multitasking.
And then last but not least, I picked up yesterday, 2 days ago. I went through the itch.io bundle for racial justice and equality. Picked out a few games and started playing Ephemeral Tale. Words I cannot say. I'm an engineering student. But it's a nice little early access JRPG, which does a few twists here and there. So far I'm like an hour in, I guess. That's what it says, but I think I spent more time on it. But it's a nice little like cutesy old school JRPG.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah.
There's always an itch for one of those, like
Yeah.
old time Chrono Trigger or Dragon Quest.
Yeah.
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 But kind of going off of the bundle and racial inequality and justice. I want to talk about diversity in video games.
Fiction.
And fiction for Nathaniel. So Nathaniel, do you want to introduce us to the topic and kind of delve into subject matter?
Okay, sure. As the resident black person of color on this podcast, the video makes me seem a lot darker than I actually am. But don't worry, I'm still black apparently. So diversity in video games and in fiction is a very interesting thing, because these are generally worlds built by people. And so in a way you choose how diverse that is. You choose how the races of the people are set up, the cultures and whatnot, and that is developed and that is then presented to the people in one way, shape, or form. And so you kind of get to choose your level of diversity or how you want to present diversity or races or people or whatnot in that, which is telling about where the culture you come from, sort of what experience you want to present, and it has a lot of different little elements and pieces together that I don't make up the experience. It's kind of hard to describe in that sense.
Right.
But I kind of want to talk about these games or these worlds, these elements of fiction that say that, oh, we are super diverse. we have cosmopolitan areas. There is no there is equality for all, and then you don't see a black person anywhere.
Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about recently is I started reading a lot of Warhammer books recently, Warhammer 40k books, and they're like, oh yeah, in this world, races are whatever comes across. They could be mutants, they could be anything, and we don't really care about race that much anymore. And you're like, yeah, sick, cool. And so you're also like, yeah, Space Marines, we recruit them from anywhere, literally, if they're good enough, literally anywhere. And you're like, oh yeah, sick, cool. And you're like, so any black ones? And you're like, and they're like, shit. It could just be simply put that they kind of haven't thought about it, and that's I get it, I understand. But but it is in saying that, oh yeah, the world is so fucked, we can't care about race anymore, and then not having a black Space Marine is kind of like presenting lip service to your video game, to your fiction, saying, oh yeah, we have all the races. We're not racist, and then being like, so what can you play as? And you're like, not the black people, and you're like, but you said they exist. You said they were equals. Why can't I? Why? And you're like, because they're not in Skyrim, and you're like,
Because you can't do your own character creation.
but you let me play as a goddamn lizard, and you're like, yeah. Come on, just power fantasy for a bit, please. Can I not live as equals for a bit in this video game universe, please?
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a bit of it. It does present a bit of lip service in that sense, and it's a question for how you want to design your game, I guess, in a way. But it's also like it's just a lot of questions you need to answer during game design to kind of think about if you're presenting racist lip service or whatnot.
Yeah, I know.
Go ahead.
I was going through the Witcher books, and like those books, the main underlying theme is racism and like xenophobia, and I think
Although all the characters in the book are white.
Yep.
Except a couple. But.
Yeah. The main character, right? How he's portrayed in visual media, at least, is like the classic straight white male, very muscular, just the dude, right?
The hunk.
The hunk.
The hunk, yeah.
The hunk.
Judge Dredd out of his costume, right?
Yeah.
And so, like,
with wolf eyes.
It makes you wonder how it would have been if it wasn't like that. If the main cast was more diversified, would it have made the message hit harder? Personally, I think it would have. Because I think you would have been able to see... Because there's always, like, in the Witcher games and the books, it's like people hate the Witchers because they're mutants or whatever. But then when you see them portrayed visually, it's like, no. But if we had more sort of diversity, people, they could show real change, I think, and like portrayed it better.
Yeah, and like one of the things that I think when I talk about The Witcher is, I for one, I'm a big fan of the writing of The Witcher. I've loved the books. When I was growing up, I read the books and I thought they were amazing. And love the games as well. But then, like, coming back to your point, I don't think The Witcher makes a statement about xenophobia, right? With its narrative and with the whole, we don't like witchers around these areas. And then they're like, mutant kind, they'll go cut you with their sword, but then you just kill them back. And then you're like, haha, witchers are more powerful because they're superhuman speed and agility, and therefore they are the outcasts. And then you think about the argument that the games in the book make about xenophobia, but then you recognize the fact that Geralt is a straight white dude,
Yeah.
and he's a hunk, right? And you're like, is this a strong enough argument that you're making here? You're trying to really push for this one theme, but like your argument is supported by a straight white dude
Mhm.
who's a hunk. Like, even if you are trying to make a certain kind of argument with your narrative and your mechanics, like, you've got to support it in a way that actually verifies it on a very base level.
Right.
I'd argue, like, I assume this book is written by a straight white dude.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd argue that, at least in a way, to the author and maybe to his most nearest people, that argument might hit home a bit better, hit home easier, of xenophobia being an issue if it's just if the only issue you have to deal with is him being a straight white dude. Like, you relate. Oh yeah, totally. I'm also a straight white dude, and I relate to. You don't relate to. No one relates to Geralt. No one. Absolutely. He's not a relatable character. Dude kills shit all the time. It's just like, yeah, I'm a badass, and this is what I do for a living because you made me. Like, maybe some people, but just like, people think they relate to him, and therefore the argument of the issue, the main principal issue being xenophobia, not being, oh, he's also not white. That makes, like, that's the only thing that you have to grasp and kind of relate to and try to figure out through the books. I'd argue
Right.
It makes the argument easier to chew on, I guess.
I think it makes it easier to chew on for an audience that is very similar to the author.
Right.
That is my argument, right? And so it's like, with the Witcher books, like, what I identify in Geralt's story is the fact that he has to make these extremely difficult decisions, and that is what I relate to when it comes to Geralt. I don't relate to the fact that he's a hunk or he has all the women in the world or whatever, right? Like, it's a stupid. I won't say stupid, but it's the fact that first of all, the author is Polish, and that entire area is predominantly white, and also the fact that it was written 25 to 30 years ago, maybe more, I don't remember. But it's at that point, I have to do an ethnographical research on this, because I'm like, in Poland, was there a sentiment regarding, like, the race movement at all? Like, was that even a thing? You know? But then look back in Polish history, and there were black rulers. Like, there was still trade routes going through Poland and stuff like that. So it was a very conscious decision, I think, on Sapkowski's part to kind of have those characters and portray the world like the way he portrayed it. But I think this kind of alludes to a much more wider topic, which is representation in video games, right? And one of the things that I've argued a lot about on Twitter and stuff like that is, like, where are my brown protagonists? And I had I still have Rishi. Rishi is a friend of mine in Toronto, and he's in Sheridan School, and like, he is a huge advocate for this, right? And I was really inspired by him when he kind of proposed to me the idea that, why don't we see more brown protagonists in video games? The only brown protagonist I've outplayed in video games is an Assassin's Creed Chronicles India, which is a side-scroller platformer game for, like, the PSP or something.
Yeah.
And I remember and playing as the titular character and What Remains of Edith Finch, and even then, there's just a hint to her brown heritage, because her dad was brown, and that's it, like, nothing else, right?
Right.
They never explicitly state that, yes, this person is, like, reflects her heritage, but you see it in, like, her brothers, for example. So that was a nice nod, and that's the only game that I've been like, I get to play as a brown protagonist who has a brown family. Holy shit, right? So that's pretty nice. But, like, I have also, like, been asking the question again and time again. Like, we need to have more representation in video games regarding, like, real life races, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, you give me a chance to play as a lizard character, but not as a black person. Like, what the fuck, right? That makes no sense. So I remember recently Capybara Games put out a forum on Twitter for mentorship opportunities and stuff like that. I signed up for the thing, and then they asked what can studios like us do better to help fight against racial injustice? And my answer to that was, there's a two-parter answer, right? One is like, consult the people who you're trying to refer to, right? Like, how hard is that? And two, represent them. Like, can we for once have a Fallout game? Not a Fallout game. Can we for once have like a Bioshock game where the protagonist is a person of color, right? Can we have some more games where the titular character is Chinese? Like, I think that representation is such a baseline issue and it's been talked about a lot on Twitter, and there have been a lot of person of color devs who have been making games with POC characters in them and protagonists in them. But when can we see that in mainstream AAA titles? And when can we see that in mainstream media and fiction, right?
Right. Yeah. Now that I'm thinking about it, like, thinking about all the characters that I have played in video games, damn, there's like nothing. The only times where I've had a character who was a person of color was essentially just the ones where I could make my own character.
I mean, a question I have about that is like, so AAA titles start making games with people of color as main character. Is that okay if they're badly written? Is that okay if they're just like, yeah, we did what you said, and then they kind of like, they do it in the white person. Sorry. They do it in the way in which they're like, oh yeah, we could totally do this, and then fuck it up. Just absolutely just like miss the point. You're like, thanks, but I'm still angry. Like, is that okay? Would that be okay with you guys if you had like badly written people of color characters in response to us being like, representation, please?
I guess that.
I have two words.
Yeah.
I have two words. Fuck no. and here's why, right? It's because of the fact that when you're trying to represent a certain ethnicity and a certain POC group, you need to understand that like behind the call for representation, there's an entire context, subcultural context, right? And so you can't just slap a brown face on a character and be like, hey, you're represented. That's not the point. The point is, can you represent the POC subculture,
right,
and the culture itself? And so, like, if you were to have a brown protagonist in your game, like, can you show that they had a certain kind of upbringing? Can you show that they have a certain kind of grandparents or a certain kind of heritage? Do they celebrate the same festivals? Like, even basic stuff like that, like all that impacts everything, right? So when you have like a black, you can speak more to this, Nathaniel, I suppose, but I would imagine that if you have a black protagonist, can you really show that they're growing up in a black household and with the same struggles that of a black person, right?
I mean,
that's what representation's about.
Yeah. I may not personally be able to speak to that as well as some people may think, but yeah. Evan, as our resident not person of color here, how do you feel about the topic of racial diversity in games?
Way to put on the hot spot.
Yeah, I mean, just like yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, like I knew coming into this podcast, it was going to be for me a lot of listening and a lot of learning. Like that was going to be my goal here. Yeah, like it was not something I thought of growing up. Just because of my background, I grew up, a straight white male in a predominantly white area. Like my high school had 3 people of color in it out of 800. So it's like not something I was necessarily exposed to heavily, which is something I'm trying to change now. I'm trying to be a lot more conscious of that.
Right.
And yeah, it's interesting. From my perspective, a lot of it is if you're trying to put in a certain culture or a person of color, it seems like a lot of time it's just boiled down to its most basic elements, and they don't really look at the details that makes it what it is. Like, if you put, there's like this this trend in fantasy that you had to have this desert country that's just filled with bazaars and just merchants and stuff like that, and that's the stereotype. And they don't really expand on it or make an actual culture there besides, oh, these people are merchants. Hey, that's their entire personality, congrats. It's like, I feel like the goal is getting past that, and like Atty said, like actually looking at like what the household is, what the subculture is like, looking at the people rather than just the color of their skin, and what defines them as their culture.
Right.
So that's kind of been my goal.
I have a question for you then. Like, if you were, so there was the one first thing is that, like, I remember I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw that I was kind of going through Twitter, and a lot of the people that I know who are Black developers were kind of up in arms about the fact that they finally got like Miles Morales' hair in the Spider-Man Miles Morales trailer right.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh my god, they got the hair right. It's because there was a Black developer who was actually like making the 3D model, right?
Yeah.
So it's like small things like that. Like, imagine that Black developers have a cause to celebrate because of the fact that they got hair right.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's that's a small victory.
Yeah. The fact that we got to that place, or got to that in the first place, is a tragedy in itself. It's now like we're trying to, I guess, normalize the success to an extent.
Yeah.
Like it's great getting that hair right, but that should be a bare minimum, right? Like,
oh, man. Yeah. No, I was just thinking. I think it'd be really funny if I made like a 3D RPG and then got all the black hair right, but absolutely fucked up the white hair. So absolutely ruined it. Just like back to triangles and polygons. Be like, yeah, this is the feeling, okay?
Yeah.
When you can't represent yourself in the character because the hair is missing. Anyways.
Yeah. I think it just goes like what we said earlier about lip service. It's about going beyond that and actually, instead of just saying you're doing something, you're being more accepting and diversive, actually showing it with what you're portraying.
Right.
Can I go on a tangent about D&D races for a second?
Oh, of course.
Before that, do you mind if I ask Evan just a very short question?
Yeah,
right?
Go for it.
Just to get a perspective. Evan, if there was a lot of uprise about like how the fact that Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order had like a white protagonist, and a lot of people were up in arms about that as well. Like, if you were to play like a black version of Cal, if you were to play Black Cal, right? Like, would that change your experience at all? Like, would you feel like you can't relate to the character at all? Or if you were to play as like,
it's like I don't identify with characters based off of appearance or anything like that. It's off of like what the story says this person is or what you can do for this as this person.
Yeah.
I don't really care what Cal looks like. I just want to play as Cal because playing as a Jedi is cool.
Yeah. Anyway, Nathaniel, that's what I just wanted to get a quick perspective on. But yeah, go ahead. D&D races.
I kind of want to go on a rant a bit to rant about D&D race representation, or like the ideas embedded thereof. So if, as a white person, you say, I don't know what it's like to be a black person, and you play tabletop role-playing games, let me just say, there's an easy way to do this. And whatever TTRPG, or whatever fancy TTRPG you're playing, go ahead and play as an orc. Go ahead and get your DM to be like, you can play as an orc. Because he will be racist to you. They think that you're brutes with no intelligence, and they think that you just go around smashing shit, and that is your whole personality. If you go into a town as an orc, and you were to meet the guards, they'd look at you, and they'd probably want to put you in jail right away, because they're like, this man's going to fuck my shit up.
Yeah.
You could, if you want to understand what it's like to play like a second generation, like, person of color, play as a half-elf or a half-orc. Play as a half-orc if you want to have the experience of people judging you based on your heritage, and absolutely having to work super hard to get yourself as an individual recognized aside from your heritage. Play as a half-elf if you want your people not to recognize you, and you have to work super hard just to get them to recognize that you are in part one of them. Right. If you want to play in Fantasyland as a black person, play as a black human. No one's gonna care. No one's gonna look at you funny. Your D&D, no one's gonna look at you like, oh man, a black person here in the north, in the snow, in Canada? No. They're gonna be like, oh yeah, no, we're too busy looking at the orc and the elf, and I don't know where halflings fit into this, but they're okay, I guess. I don't know.
The rhetoric works.
But yeah, if you want to understand what it's like to be a different race, play one of those things and kind of try and get the experience of people being racist to you for the color of your skin and your heritage when you yourself are an individual made up much more of that. But yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's so important that he brought that up is simply because of the fact that, like, IRL, we are all human beings that can talk on the internet. Cats sometimes do that. But beyond the fact that we are, as human beings, segregated and discriminated based off of our skin color, right? That's the discrimination basis. When you take it to Fantasyland and D&D, suddenly the discrimination basis becomes more higher abstracted into away from skin color and towards actual physical like traits and stereotypes, right? But in the end, the discrimination and the stereotyping remains, right, even though it has been abstracted one layer up. And I think it's somewhat of a sad sentiment to think that even when we do find aliens in the universe, we will find a way to discriminate.
Almost definitely.
Right? And it's like, come on, man. But so it's somewhat of a sad sentiment in my mind when I think about that. So whenever I'm DMing, I'm like, I try to create a world that is less racist for all means and matters. And I think that's the bare minimum that anyone can do. Like, honestly, even when we're talking about sexism, right? Like, when D&D first started out as a game, I'm pretty sure there were rules in place that would penalize you for being a woman.
Oh yeah.
And because you would just have minus to strength and plus to dex, something like that. And I'm like, so you're just sexually profiling instead of racially profiling. And now D&D is turning into more of like, even now, half orcs have more brute strength, therefore they're better suited for X classes because this is how their genetic makeup is.
Yeah.
And like as a DM, I'm personally against that. So I always tell them, like, when I'm considering that, I'm like, if you have an idea for a character, if you want to be a skinny half orc who's very intelligent and wants to be a wizard, like, let's go for it, right? Let's re-allot your stat bonuses that you get inherently from your half orc heritage. Let's redistribute it to intelligence instead of strength, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's just the math. You can switch around the numbers and it's fine. But the fact that in the 5e player's handbook, when you open it up, there are pre-allotted skills, numbers to certain skills. I don't know how I feel about that.
It depends on what kind of ideology you come into the world, or like you view the world as, right? It's like, if you see somebody who's like 7 foot tall, you're like, this man probably plays basketball, right? But he's like, actually, I don't like basketball, I like to read. And you're like, oh, that's a waste. You're like, oh man, look at that, he was born with stats into strength and tallness, I guess, because that's a stat now. But he's like, but he doesn't like to. He doesn't use it. That's the ideology that D&D comes into play with, is that your genetic makeup and your heritage in that sense directly affects naturally your traits, and then like you go on from there. And you're like, if I want to min-max, best thing to do is be like an orc fighter and just like hit things. And you're like, yeah, it doesn't. That's a bit and part of it. Pathfinder has a fun thing where like you have a whole bunch of starter racial traits, and then like there's a whole bunch of other alternate racial traits that you can switch things out for. So you're like, oh yeah, I'm an elf, but I'm an elf from that water place, and so I'll switch out this trait for this trait to kind of better represent the fact that you come from a different place, or that different, like, the location you come from and your cultural background and what you grew up as and whatnot kind of additionally affects you instead of just like, I'm an elf. Haha. But these are just ways of abstracting or understanding the idea that like something about us we don't control has an effect over us as we exist, and continuing on from there.
Right.
It's a system and it's stupid.
Yeah. I think
That's
that's
an interesting
Nathaniel.
perspective, though. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Nathaniel, you brought up the orcs specifically earlier, which I found really interesting, because orcs have been seeing changes with the most recent releases in the D&D handbook. So in Vola's guide, when they were released, they are an objectively evil race and have a -2 to their intelligence.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, but in the 2 most recent books, Eberron and Wildmount, they've dropped the -2 to intelligence and they're no longer trending towards evil alignments, which is
Chaotic
interesting
evil
to see.
alignment.
Yeah, now
I-
they're opening it up for player interpretation to do what they want with the character.
Okay, understand that even as it something I kind of get angry about in tabletop RPGs. Let's maybe end the tabletop stuff after this. But like an issue I have with this is that when people see the chaotic evil or like the label as evil or whatnot, they immediately think that therefore all the races, every agent from this thing, from this monster codex, whatever, is evil, and you're like, no,
Yep.
that doesn't make sense from a gameplay standpoint, because that's just like super easy to read, and at the same time doesn't make sense from like a real standpoint, because that's not how it works.
Yep.
Sure, maybe, and like, oh man, I have a lot of, I could go off about orcs and D&D for days and about how it's like very colonial way of thinking about like, yeah, orcs are evil and look at all these evil things they do, and you're like, I mean, anyways, but discussions. For
Every brown person speaks like this, and no one speaks of Bob and Maggie.
Oh God.
God damn. But yeah, let's get off tabletop trade for a bit and kind of zoom back out. I do want to say that I think that when talking earlier about kind of how these mechanics are put into place and how people develop games with good elements of representation in them, I think one of the key things there is to have a diverse team.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in the world of UX and design, like it's stressed so heavily that you will automatically make a better product if you have a very diverse team, because you have very different perspectives, not just racially but also like background based. So one of the things that we can kind of use this to transition into some of the next things we're going to talk about, but maybe not. Actually, I'm looking at the document, but what I will say is, like, I think that it's, as a designer, it is infinitely important to recognize the fact that if your team does not have diversity in it, if you're surrounded by like-minded people, you will be in a like-minded backgrounds, you will be in an echo chamber, and you will not be able to see outside perspectives. And when you're creating products and games, the most important thing, in my opinion, is perspective.
Yeah.
And just in life, period, the most important thing is perspective. And you can't have that if you aren't surrounded by people who have different opinions than your own. It can challenge you on those.
Right.
I'd like to present the business case to that, to the businesses that exist. If you are listening, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast, but if you are, thank you. When you only have a certain people of a certain background working on your thing, the audience that this product, whatever it may be, is designed for, is for that background. It is very hard for you to think and formulate and make something for a different background when all you have is one background, right?
Yeah.
Increasing your audience increases the products that you can sell, increases the money that you make. Simply put, having a more diverse team increases your audience you can sell to, and therefore increases your profit margin. Honestly, you could pay these people you've hired for diversity the same amount of money that you pay the other people that you've hired. You are not at all adjusting your profit. Like, you are not at all adjusting or inflating how much money you're spending. You are just increasing the amount of money you're getting back.
Yep.
So go ahead and hire people. Go ahead and hire a diverse set of people, and you will appreciate the money you make in return. Corporate world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The math checks out.
Yeah.
Another PowerPoint presentation.
Nathaniel, master of PowerPoints.
The master of PowerPoints. One thing I did want to talk about real quick, totally different line of thought. But I wanted to talk about how sexy the PS5 is.
I love Seto Kaiba too.
I think it is gorgeous, and I want to know the designers who were behind it. Like, I was yelling and screaming at my monitor the entire time I was watching the presentation. It is, wow. Like, have you noticed that the arc shape makes a V, which is 5? Have you noticed that?
I didn't.
No.
I didn't.
Small things. I think it's okay. I am a very big fan of the PS5 and this design. And I think this is probably one of the last steps for the console generation.
Right.
After which you're going to start moving towards more innovative platforms. But this is it. Like, SSDs, insane RTX graphics cards with, sorry, not RTX, but ray tracing graphics cards. We have the cloud storage platforms. PS5 is such a smart thing by having 2 kinds of PS5s, the digital edition and the standard edition. What they're basically saying is, goodbye GameStop, goodbye EB Games, we're moving online, right?
Yeah.
Your games are not going to be physical anymore in a few years, so get ready for that. So if you have a cartridge of Super Mario for the NES, save it up. It's going to go for a very high price. So in 10 years.
Like it doesn't already.
Like it doesn't already, yeah.
So Addy, will you end up buying 2 PS5s? One to play on and one to be like your centerpiece in like your house?
I'm actually thinking of just buying a cabinet when I have enough money, and I'm just gonna have a cabinet that is themed around the PS5, like it's black and white, right? And I'm gonna try and like adjust the LED lightings to have a little bit of blue, like the blue shimmer that it has, the royal blue shimmer, and I want to have a PS5 centerpiece.
Addy. That's a shrine.
No, I'm kidding. The PS5 does intrigue me a lot. Yeah.
See, the thing I like about the design that I wanted to be like, oh yeah, the design is neat, before you got into, I want to worship the PS5 in a dedicated corner of my house. I was gonna be like, I just like how the curves mean that you get good airflow, whether it's on its side or standing upright.
Okay, but listen, the PS5 has the best exclusives ever. Right? Xbox stands no chance.
Oh god.
Like, the design of the PS5 is infinitely better than that fucking cabinet that Xbox has called, right? Like, it's... Anyway, my point being that, yes, the design is not just elegant, but it's also solution-based. It's functional. As Don Norman would put it, it's very emotionally intelligent design because it's functional and it's aesthetically pleasing and it serves the entire purpose that it's built for, right? So it is a very well-designed machine from the looks of it and the presentation. And if the numbers that they announced at the presentation or the hardware conference that they had are true, then we're in for some seriously good-looking games. But at the same time, there's been a lot of concern regarding the PS5 because of the fact that artists and other people might have to spend some more time creating assets for something
Yeah.
of that spec.
Mhm.
But I don't know. The PS5 looks gorgeous, and I want it. And I want to play Spider-Man Miles Morales on it. I want to play Horizon 2. You know,
Yep.
like
I want to put the PS5 on the Xbox.
yes, I want to use the Xbox as a platform for the PS5.
Oh yeah, where's your router? Oh, I put it on top of the mini fridge. Meanwhile, I'm out here playing Breath of the Wild on my toaster.
I saw that meme. Hey, listen, the Switch is still one of the best indie consoles out there.
Yeah.
The Switch is totally worth the money. It's just that if you want high for fidelity games, you want the PS5, not the Xbox. Unless you're a sports gamer, in which case you want the Xbox. Because all you play is FIFA and NBA, which I don't judge. Like, those are good games. I play a lot of FIFA myself. But yeah, it's definitely, Xbox has its own gamer bro market.
Yeah.
That I'm not touching.
Yeah.
I'm not going close to the Microsoft consoles.
I have been out of the console war for like. So other than Nintendo consoles, which I've gotten every single one since the DS, the last console I've ever owned was a PlayStation 2. It's such a good console.
The PS2 was something, man. The PS2 had some really sick games on it. Was Sons of Liberty Metal Gear was on PS2 or was it on PS3?
Sons of
was on PS2,
Liberty
right?
was on PS2.
Are
Yeah.
consoles good because of the
Sorry,
games that
Sons
they
of
have
Liberty?
on
Sons
them?
of Liberty?
Yeah.
The PlayStation exclusives are so good. Like, the PlayStation Studio is branding as
Does
they're
that
now
make the
released.
console good though?
I would say
Yes.
so.
Like, okay.
Because like that's why people don't look fondly on the Wii U, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the Wii U had issues other than
Yeah.
its selection, but yeah, that's one of them.
Yeah.
The really cheap plastic gamepad
Yeah.
that it came with, and a lot of ergonomic issues. But I would argue that the games library that the console ships with has a lot to do, and the exclusives that come with it has a lot to do with the console itself. The reason Nintendo are still going so strong after all these years is because they have so many strong first party titles.
Oh yeah.
People will still buy their consoles just to play Breath of the Wild, right? I know I have a friend who bought the console just to play Odyssey. Like, that's the only reason he bought the Switch. And then he started getting other games, obviously. Speaking of which, Nintendo just released a free game on the Switch. That's about skipping. So you can use the Joy-Cons to do 5-minute workouts, skip roping in your room. Side tangent.
I was hoping to be skipping classes, but okay. I'm much better at that. By the way, I make shitty puns. I'm not sorry.
You'll fit in very well here.
Very well.
Barry Bell. So yeah, any other thoughts about the PS5 before we talk a little bit more about making games?
I think that's it.
I'll take so. Yeah.
All right. For making games, I kind of wanted to ask all of you a question as game developers or people who are interested in games. I see you, Nathaniel. It's how do you represent a culture and people that you don't associate with or belong to while developing a game? And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think there's more to be talked about with respect to this topic.
I have another 2 words for this. Ask questions.
Yep.
That's the only way to know things. Ask about them.
Yep.
I mean, oh, sorry, go on. No, I interrupted you.
No, keep going.
I was gonna say, I think the big question you want to ask is, like, in a way, what story do you want to tell?
Right.
I think something we might forget occasionally is the idea that some stories don't require race to be an important issue, or
Oh yeah.
race to be the only issue. And so, like, while we get, like, while race is a big issue in America today and like in the world, um, does the race of your character matter to the story you want to tell?
Right.
Does the race of the cultural heritage of the character matter to the story you want to tell? And I feel like for a lot of us, for a lot of people of color, it does. It impacts our lives on a daily basis. For people with friends of people of color, it might as well do to kind of tell their story or whatnot. Even like, and just because your main character isn't a person of color doesn't mean that the story doesn't have to involve people of color in that way. It's just like the question I want to ask first is, does it matter?
Yeah.
But then you move on to like, yeah, ask questions and whatnot. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I think it's important that you said that because, like, yeah, that should be the first step. I know when I'm playing games where there's multiple characters you can choose from, I usually just go for whoever has the best design. Well, in anything, right? I don't care really who I play as. If it doesn't matter to the story, obviously. Like sometimes the story will be like, if there's different stories depending on who you're playing, well, obviously I'm going to play as them all, but that's besides the point. If it does not matter to the story, just make a good story. That's really what you should be aiming for, right? And even if it does matter, make a good story.
And like to that point, when I play Overwatch, like I think Lucio's design is so sick.
Oh yeah.
Right? So I always play Lucio because I think Lucio is just the sickest character ever. Symmetra is the only brown character in the cast, but that's okay because I think I like Symmetra. Overwatch is a great job, by the way. It's very international in the way it does things. So Overwatch, Blizzard, props for that. Even though you have your issues, paying your employees, that's okay. Like,
your employees do great work. Yeah.
But one thing I do want to talk about while making a game is asking questions is an important thing. But I also think that in your game, like games and fiction are mediums of communication as much as they are entertainment. And one thing that has been stressed upon a lot in my university career, and it's ingrained in me now, is that everything makes an argument. Every game makes an argument, whether you like it or not. If you have a game that is full of these interesting creatures and species in this RPG, none of them are remotely human. You have like lizard people, cat people, dog people, whatever you have, right? Even then, but the context of your world is very much like realistic. You're still making a statement there.
Right.
You're saying that in this world, like the culture is significantly in unaffected just because of the fact that people are now cats and dogs. One example of this is Night of the Woods, right? Night of the Woods is a game. It's a great game, but it uses a cartoony style where all the characters are like animals, are represented as animals. But it is so obvious that the game screams that it's a white neighborhood because none of the characters show any cultural significance that is relatable to a color that isn't white.
Right.
And so what you're doing is you're avoiding the problem in some ways. You're making a statement that you don't want to touch that pod of criticism or work or effort because you don't want to delve into that territory. You're avoiding it by having your characters be represented by cats and dogs and other creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And even if that's an aesthetic style you want to go for it. But remember, you can also represent POCs by in having their culture a part of your world, like, right?
Yeah.
If you Night in the Woods is a very white game, like you can tell it's a white game because there's no reference to any culture that isn't white.
Hmm.
And like certainly some people will be able to insert themselves into these characters. Like there's representation for gay people and for the LGBTQ community, which is great. But like you can represent a lot more in your games. People are very diverse, right? And even by having an art style that is cutesy, aesthetically pleasing, like cartoony, yeah, you can still talk about race and without having to just use skill and color, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of subcultural context behind that, and I think going for cartoony art styles that like don't touch the skin color and the human body and the figure and stuff like that, you're making a statement by avoiding talking about that.
Yeah.
Sometimes the question just ends up being like whether you feel that you want to talk about that in this game, in this story, in this fiction that you're writing. Is this while there's so many things going on, is that something you want to broach, something you feel comfortable, something you feel capable of broaching? And like I don't like while it could be improved, I don't fault the person who made the game for doing it the way he did.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just raising awareness, right? Like
Yeah.
it's the awareness that it should be, as developers, like all developers should be conscious about the messages that they are choosing to have in their game or not.
And the very choice of having the message indicates the choice of not having a message in. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And so like it's really not that hard to ask questions and represent like stuff. It takes minimal effort, man. Like the amount of time you spend on your coffee break, like if you spend having your coffee with a POC, you will learn more about their culture and their background over that 5-minute coffee break than you can possibly imagine, right?
Yeah.
It's just about whether or not you're willing to put in the effort to do it.
I think
That's the
This
rule.
also applies to other people of color.
Oh yeah.
You are you can still be at fault. You are not. Go talk to other people of color, you assholes. Anyways, yeah.
That's me he's talking about. I think that for a lot of people, they're scared. They're scared to ask these uncomfortable questions. But at some point, they need to ask them so that they don't get into a situation where they're treading on something that they shouldn't be, right?
Mhm.
So safe places to ask these questions are very important, right? That's something I really, really love about the Games Den, right? Everyone's very open with each other. We're just like, yeah, if you want to ask questions about anything, go ahead. Well, we probably have someone who can at least give their input, their experience with it, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Having safe spaces is very important, and I'm pretty sure most people who are in your workspace, around your workspace, like will be relatively comfortable, especially in the cities and stuff like that. Like, will be pretty comfortable talking about their experiences, and their culture. Like, I'm always happy to share my culture with anybody. Like, I can talk about the million different festivals we have, and how I choose not to celebrate most of them.
Yeah.
But like it's an entire thing, right?
Yeah.
And I also, yeah, I think generally speaking, are there any other things you want to include, in this episode? Any other tips, like any other suggestions for developers to make their games more inclusive and racially just?
Could I elaborate a bit on the idea of a safe space?
Yeah, go for it.
So an issue that I come to deal with a lot in terms of safe spaces is being a person people feel comfortable talking to about things. I at times can seem to get very angry, can seem to get very agitated. Well, I feel I understand myself for jokes. I can my wit is a bit aggressive in that sense. And that, in some sense, even though if I may offer the suggestion of, you can talk about stuff, you can talk about shit, that that other idea's juxtaposition against that, right? The idea of aggressive makes it seem like I'm not. While this is a safe space, I may not be a safe person to talk to.
Right.
So, look into yourself. Look into how you react to things and how you act towards things. If you want to help in being a safe space, to kind of like look if there's anything about you that doesn't promote that idea, and like think about if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Take the time to understand your personal and cognitive biases.
Eat.
It's a life lesson
Like
for
Freddy's
everyone.
Eat.
I think we have a life lesson at the end of every single episode.
That's how it should be.
Yep.
Video games can teach you a lot, apparently. Make you very wise.
Like how to use the right stick to use your camera and the left stick to move around. Dexterity, man.
Holy shit.
Dexterity challenge. Do you know that? It's
I do that in
crazy.
real life? Oh my god.
My mom doesn't know that.
All the moms know that. That's why they have eyes in the back of their heads.
Ooh. My mom's being called out here. Sorry, Mom.
We love you.
But yeah, I kind of wanted to quickly outrow this episode by doing a small segment that I kind of want to add, which is Games Den Recommends. We all get to go around in a circle and we all get to recommend one thing. It can be anything. It could be a game, a movie, a book, a person to talk to. It could be water.
Oh, you just put me down for water every single episode.
Evan, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So, one thing that I ended up thinking about this episode when we're talking about diversity and representing different people, the way I can relate to that most is with the hard of hearing culture. I am fully deaf in my right ear, and one of the games that I feel does very well with that is this super short, like 20-minute game called Blind Trust, which is a 2-player co-op game where one player is completely blind and the other is completely deaf, and they have to help each other through puzzles.
Right.
And it was a very interesting experience for me personally, because it's a first-person game where I'm not at a disadvantage. And it's a very interesting insight into what it feels like interacting with the world in that way. So I would recommend people play that. It's only 20 minutes. You need one friend. That's it.
Nice.
I want to do that now.
It's a good game.
Thank you, Evan.
How about you, Shashank?
This is gonna be a bit weird, but I'm pulling on my theater background. I have one of that. I'm gonna recommend people, like, I assume people have those worlds in their head that they just, like, every once in a while they'll add a scene to, sort of thing. Like, they'll imagine characters doing certain things, right? Am I wrong here? Do we have those?
You are absolutely wrong. You're the only one. You're the only
No, that's definitely me.
I recommend, like, fleshing that world out. Like, try adding new characters. Try putting it on paper. It can be a really great start to understanding how you view the world, from outside of yourself, even.
And it can be fun.
Yeah, it can be very fun.
Interesting.
Yeah. Nathaniel, what would you recommend?
I've been looking down because that's where I have a lot of books, and like I've been reading a lot of books lately. And like I guess I'll just pull up one of the most recent fiction books I've read. Shadowrun. You can't see this. You won't. I'll just tell you about it. This is a Shadowrun book. Never Deal with Dragons. It's the first book, the first volume in a trilogy. If you know about Shadowrun, it's like cyberpunk, dystopian future, mega corporations, kind of like 20 years from now. But like in this world, 1980s-ish or something, like magic came back to the world, and like people started, people of every race, gender, and creed started transforming into different what are called meta races. Some people transform into elves, some people transform into orcs, into trolls, which are just bigger orcs, and some people transform into like dwarves who have apparently like thermal vision. And this is just kind of like a good introduction to this world and like kind of how everything goes together. And it was a pretty great read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard about it before. I should check it
Yeah.
out.
If you wanna look at a place where race breaks down, like the idea where race and like because there's your race and there's your meta species race, how that all breaks down and how worlds like divide culture and whatnot. It's just a really good thought provoking read in that sense. But yeah.
Nice.
That is pretty awesome.
Atty,
I
what would you-
personally, so I'm reading a book right now that I want to recommend, but I'm pretty sure I will still be reading it next week, so I'm not going to recommend it this week. So instead, what I will recommend today is a website. It's called accessible.games. And it's the Able Gamers website. And if you're a developer, you can actually find the developer resources. If you're a player, you can find player participation resources. And you can really just, it's a great website to kind of understand and get to grips with how to design for accessibility your games. Because I think games really lack a lot of features when it comes to accessibility. Even simple stuff like starting your game with subtitles on, you will notice 70% of your players are okay with that.
Mhm.
And it helps accessibility for those who are hard of hearing and who have hard visualization skills. So check out accessible.games. Yeah, that is my recommendation of the week. Awesome. Thank you for a very thought-provoking and awesome discussion, everybody. And when should we have an outro phrase? Do we need an outro phrase?
Well, I always do the whole like, oh, we're a new podcast. Hey, by the way, guys, we're a new podcast. So if there's any hitches that you want us to address, please let us know. If there's something you think we did really well, let us know and we'll keep doing it. I know one thing that we've addressed is Dr. Hammer. He's been put into a time lock for now. So
I took his hammer.
oh no.
He smashed his way out of the time lock.
I mean, if he does, he still doesn't have his hammer, so hey.
Hey, Dr. Hammer.
Wait, so is Dr. Hammer a person or is Dr. Hammer the hammer?
I think Dr. Hammer is a way of life. Mostly.
Understandable.
Yep.
Design your games of accessibility and Dr. Hammer.
And with
Yep.
that, Nathaniel's out, so I think that's it.
Goodbye, everybody. Have a great time.
Join us next
Have
week.
a good one.
Never again. Never again.